last number we got, but that is slated to possibly change January 31st when the next reporting period starts, and once the next monitoring report is out, we're anticipating will be anywhere from 5 to 7 paragraphs. With those 5 to 7 paragraphs, 3 periods into compliance, meaning that those remaining paragraphs only need one more monitoring period before also being dismissed from the case. So we are on pace to hopefully have this case dismissed next late summer, fall, which is a huge accomplishment for the police department. I think that the settlement agreement primarily talks about use of force, and I think it's important for us to remember a lot of the original case studies that were looked at had to actually do with tasers and not just officer-involved shootings. This process has involved us updating and training our officers at a higher level that's approved by the settlement agreement parties. This process has helped us develop training on how we will investigate these uses of force, the discipline that will be imposed on these uses of force, and the accountability of making sure that everybody is doing their job all the way from the first line supervisor all the way through the chief of police, internal affairs, the superintendent of police reform, and ensuring that discipline is fair, equitable, and within policy. And I think that's an important key, because a lot of times we'll have situations come up and we will actually have community members, politicians who feel like, for example, that a member of the department should be terminated. But when you investigate them for the level of what they've been sustained for, it clearly indicates that they can only be given a certain amount of discipline. So it's really made the process fair. It's taken a lot of discretion out that sometimes was abused, and it's important for us to recognize that. Improving the department was the overall goal of the settlement agreement, and I think that even during some of our most difficult incidents in recent past, officer-involved shootings, the one thing that I've always pointed to, that our officers are continually trying to de-escalate situations. They're showing empathy towards the individuals they're working with, compassion, and they're trying to do the right thing. Today is about us advancing and showing the advancements we do in training. Today you'll see some of the training we do at the reality-based training, how fluid it is, but also how relatable it is. A lot of the incidents we use to train our officers are actually incidents that have happened at APD that we modify, add another dimension to ensure that our officers are seeing everything that we could have done improved upon, or to change a scenario a little bit to tweak it to ensure that our officers are reacting the same way when there is a change of something that they may be familiar with. You know, there's a lot of critics at times who question the training of the Albuquerque Police Department. And I think as you go through the training that is going to be showcased today, you see how we've utilized reality-based training. I challenge the media to find any other agency that has a facility, the reality-based training program we do, and provides their officers with a level of training related to incidents that have occurred within their own department. Every time I come out here, I'm impressed how our team is adapting, how they're finding different scenarios, how they're looking at incidents that we've dealt with in the past, and they're able to apply those to a training scenario so that we are able to provide our officers with the most updated, advanced type of training possible. So I know we'll take some quick questions based off of that first part of this, and then we're going to go into a classroom, then we're going to go do a scenario, and then Mayor Keller will have some closing remarks. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, sir.
Briefly explain, when you say the paragraphs, there are 250, now you're down to 11. Can you just briefly explain what a paragraph is?
The settlement agreement was broken into sections, and each section had a number of paragraphs, and they dealt with different topics. One may be internal investigations, one may be use of force, one training, community engagement. And within each section, there are several paragraphs that indicate, number one, a place where we needed to develop a policy. Number two, and that's primary compliance, which we met years ago. Number two, when that training was implemented and it was successfully given to all of the department. And that was secondary compliance, which we've met a while back. And the third and hardest level is where we show proficiency that the policy we've developed, trained, is actually being used by our officers in real time, and that is the process we're following. Once we've met all three compliance levels, we have to hold that compliance level for 24 months, 4 monitoring periods. So the vast majority of these paragraphs have already been, of the 255, all but 11 have already gone through 24 months or 4 monitoring periods where they're dismissed from the settlement agreement at a certain time. So we will be proposing another big dismissal of paragraphs in the near future. I think we're somewhere about 60, have Jason here, somewhere in the 60 percentile that they've actually been dismissed. They're no longer even available for the courts to discuss. One of the ones that in question is OBRD, our cameras. It came up in court, but technically that's been dismissed from the case, and it's no longer something that the federal government can monitor us or bring up. So that's how the paragraphs work, and that's where we're at with the paragraphs. And like I said, come January 31st, we should be somewhere around 5 to 7 paragraphs remaining for a 6-month period. So if you do the math, started with about 255 paragraphs that we're being monitored on, the police department. There's others for the civilian oversight agency, but we're now down to somewhere around 11, and that's even going to further drop to right around 5 for this last 6 months. Yes, Nick?
Cliff Notes version, what are some of the 11 paragraphs topics that you guys are trying to get rid of?
Use of force, review of internal investigations is one of the topics left. Our PIMS process is one of the topics left, and Force Review Board rounds out basically what's left. Yes, sir.
Can you give us a brief explanation of like the demonstrations that you're going to take us through?
You know what? We're going to go through a variety of scenarios that are based on our training, and the big thing to see is like you're going to recognize the overall concept of some of these scenarios. They're actually incidents our officers have been through, where we've changed things a little bit to get them to deal with individuals. I went through RBT earlier this year, and one of the scenarios was an individual standing there threatening suicide with a firearm. And obviously, we've all seen that before over the past year with our department having to deal with those situations. So we're putting it real life with our officers, for example. But I don't want to give you too much insight into what they are, but one of them is also going to be a drill that we've developed that you will see how officers have to make a quick transition from one tool to another tool, and the person may present a different threat to different officers. So our officers can't tell the next person, go in there, do this, this, and this, because it obviously can change from scenario to scenario, so it's hard for them to anticipate making a decision without actually observing and making the decision of the force used based off of the observation. Any other questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to see if you could talk a little bit more about, what the culture of the department was like 4 years ago before the Fed stepped in versus what it is now 4 years later, and just some of the big differences you've seen with officers.
We're actually going to go back beyond that. We're going to go back to the period of time that got us in trouble, 2010, 11, 12. If you look at a lot of our officer-involved shootings, I mean, we had shootings where we shot people from the top of a roof truck, top into the cab of the truck. We had shootings where, tasings, where we tased individuals on elevated platforms. We had uses of force where we didn't have the right resources out there from the beginning, and we escalated them to different points in time. We've had the same. We had individuals threatening suicide and us having to deal with those individuals. And a lot of times, a lot of the issues that the Department of Justice had with us was the review and the accountability towards those officers who were involved in those situations. And did we de-escalate or did we advance the problem? So some of the big changes I see now is we have lethal, less lethal negotiating officers on every call, a force array. We have a process now where force is reviewed at every single level. Force used to be reviewed in my time as a sergeant with a one-page bubble sheet, and it took us like 10 minutes. And we asked the officer-involved questions. We didn't attempt to interview people who force was used on. We didn't attempt to interview witnesses. Hey, officer, tell me what you did and what happened and why you did it. And basically, that was how we based it. So there's been a lot of changes to this process. And I think the mayor's here. Mayor, did you want to go now or ready? So I'm going to turn it over to the mayor. He'll talk a little bit about why we're here and give an update on his side. And then we will walk through the scenarios and we'll take questions at the end. Thanks.
Okay, well, good afternoon. And, you know, for us, as we've stated, we're just wrapping up our last session with the independent monitor that we just had in terms of the settlement agreement, otherwise known as the CASA. And for us, I think there's a couple of things. You know, number one, 2/3 of it, now 67%, we're actually out of. That is incredible when you consider where we were at about 3 years ago. And I just want to acknowledge a couple of different groups of folks who've made that happen. You know, first and foremost, this change is real in that the officers bear the burden of that change, and they have embraced it, and they have actually honored what the CASA is about, and the monitor has verified that. So I know there's always some skeptics out there, and that's okay, but I just want folks to remember that the best court supervised and Department of Justice run monitoring system is what allows me to say just that. I'm not making it up. It's not my opinion. It is the opinion of the Department of Justice and the independent monitor and the judge who validated all that. So I believe it's as significant as it possibly can be when you're talking about something as nuanced and as difficult as culture change and use of force and law enforcement and violence. And so for us, thank you to the officers who made this a reality so far, to the advocates who never gave up on our department or our community, and also to the public, who I know has been with us through ups and downs on this process. That's why I also want to take a moment to reflect back when we came in. The city's policy was to basically do the low-hanging fruit and check off a bunch of the easier tasks. And they did that, and then we were kind of stuck in the mud. So then we decided we were just going to say yes. We were going to do whatever the monitor said, whether it was Portland policies or New Jersey policies. That did not work at all either. And that's when we saw the backsliding about 3 years ago. And that's when the chief and I said, we're going to do this different. The third time we're getting it right. And the way to get it right was to make sure that we are committed to change for all the right reasons, even regardless of the DOJ. But we're going to do it our way. We're going to make policies that make sense for our officers, for Albuquerque, New Mexico, and we're going to learn from those best practices. We are not going to copy them writ large. And so that has been a drastic change, and that's why you see this incredible progress. Of course, we know that we still have a ways to go with respect to things like self-monitoring. Even though we're 99% compliant, we know we need to keep that up for a couple of years. And we know key to that, even after those years, is our structure in terms of the superintendent of reform. This has been another major change when we decided to do this our way, and so we created the Office of Superintendent of Reform. And that has set us up to maintain this long after the DOJ leaves, which we hope is going to be at the end of this self-sustaining period. Now, a couple of other things I would also share is that I want to remind folks that one key area for APD that is still being monitored by the independent monitor, and rightfully so, is force review. So there still is that independent monitoring of those uses of force that we all know can be very complicated and very challenging. And so we do have that independent pair of eyes in that through the court hearing process, that transparency on that particular piece of the reform process. Now with that, I will also say that the goal of reform has always been to be able to continue to keep Albuquerque safe, but also to do it in a way that is constitutional. And to balance those two things, we know we're going to make mistakes. We know that it is complicated when you are dealing with split-second decisions and use of force. And that's why the real measure that the CASA has always preached and that we've always believed in, it's not that we have zero incidents. It's that we find them right away, we're transparent about them, and we hold ourselves accountable and we don't repeat them again. That is what reform is all about. Unfortunately, you know, it's kind of a, you know, a mirage if you just think we're not going to have any problematic use of force, right? This is very difficult and dangerous situations. So that's a reality our officers face, and the officers face all around America. What matters is how we deal with it, how we train to reduce it as much as possible, how we learn from it, and how we hold those accountable who do it the wrong way. And that's what we are demonstrating more than ever before in the history of our police department. And that sets us up, I think, not just for the next few years, but for generations to come. All right, so Francesco will take us from here.
All right, to explain a little bit more what we're going to do, we're going to move you all into a classroom now. If you need to leave your bags here, you can. We're going to come back into this room. So we're going to move into a classroom, and we're going to have Lieutenant Nico. He's going to be explaining our uses of force, level 1, 2, and 3. And then we're going to come out here and actually show those to you and show you what they look like. You guys will be able to get up on the high risers up there with your cameras and view down to see the actual scenario. And then we will move outside to do an actual real life scenario. Okay, and then if you guys can hold your questions, write them down if you have to. We'll take questions once we move into this next room after the classroom. Okay, thank you.